The crack of the rifle echoed through the Montana Valley as Jessica Dawson watched her father's shot bring down the buck they'd been tracking since dawn. It was 1878, and despite being 20 years old, Jessica still found herself trailing after her father like she was still a little girl in pigtails, desperate for his approval that never seemed to come. "A fine shot, father," she offered, her voice carrying on the crisp autumn air. Thomas Dawson barely acknowledged her words with a grunt as he strode forward to claim his prize. His weathered face, etched with lines of bitterness since Jessica's mother had died 6 years earlier, showed no pleasure in the kill, only grim satisfaction. Jessica followed behind, gathering her skirts to navigate the rocky terrain. Her father had insisted she wear proper attire even for hunting, making the excursion all the more difficult. "Ain't no daughter of mine gonna be mistaken for some ranch hand," he'd growl whenever she dared suggest, wearing trousers like many frontier women had taken to doing. "We'll have meat for the winter," she said, trying once more to engage him. "Won't have much of anything if Peterson follows through on his threats," her father muttered, pulling his hunting knife from its sheath. "Claiming I owe him for supplies we never received." Jessica bit her lip. Samuel Peterson owned the general store in White Rock, and he was a fair businessman as far as she could tell. If he said they owed money, they probably did, but suggesting as much would only fuel her father's temper. "I'll handle the butchering tonight," she offered instead. Her father snorted. "And who'd want to eat meat cut by a woman's hand? You'll tend to your proper duties. That new schoolhouse needs teachers, and you'd do well to present yourself before some other girl gets the position." Jessica's heart sank. They'd had this conversation countless times. "Father, I've told you, I don't want to teach. I want to work the ranch with you." Thomas Dawson's face darkened as he stood, blood on his hands from the buck. "No daughter of mine is going to waste away on a ranch like some cowhand. You'll marry soon enough, but until then, you'll do something respectable." The ride home was silent, the carcass of the deer strapped to her father's horse. Their ranch was modest compared to some of the sprawling cattle operations in the territory, but Jessica loved every acre of it. The 2-story house her father had built for her mother stood as a testament to better days, though its paint had begun to peel in the years since her passing. As they approached the barn, Jessica noticed an unfamiliar horse tied up outside. A magnificent black stallion with a white diamond between its eyes. "We have a visitor," she said. Her father squinted toward the house. "Ain't expecting nobody." They dismounted, and Thomas immediately headed toward the house, his rifle still in hand. Jessica quickly tied up their horses, giving them each a reassuring pat before hurrying after her father. When she entered the house, she found her father standing in the doorway to the kitchen, his back rigid with tension. Beyond him, a tall man sat at their table, a steaming cup of coffee before him. "Mr. Dawson," the stranger said, rising to his feet, "I apologize for letting myself in. Your housekeeper, Mrs. Walsh, said I could wait." Jessica moved to stand beside her father, getting her first clear look at the visitor. He was lean but broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark blonde hair curled slightly beneath the brim of his Stetson, which he'd respectfully placed on the table. "Who might you be?" Thomas demanded. "Ethan Keller," the man said, extending his hand. "I've purchased the old Wilson place to the north of your property." Jessica felt her pulse quicken. The Wilson Ranch had been abandoned for nearly 2 years after Old Man Wilson passed. It was a beautiful piece of land with ample water rights, which had likely been the attraction for this Mr. Keller. Her father ignored the outstretched hand. "Wilson promised me first claim on that land." Ethan Keller's hand dropped slowly, but his polite expression remained. I wasn't aware of any arrangement, sir. I purchased the property legally from Mr. Wilson's son in Denver. That no-good son never worked a day on that ranch, Thomas spat. He had no right to sell it. Father, Jessica said softly, placing a hand on his arm. He shrugged her off. I won't have some city boy playing at ranching on my doorstep. I assure you, Mr. Dawson, I'm no stranger to ranch work, Ethan said, his calm demeanor unruffled by Thomas's hostility. I worked cattle in Wyoming for 8 years before saving enough to buy my own spread. Jessica studied the man more closely. His hands were calloused, his stance confident but not arrogant. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. Wyoming, her father scoffed. Different country up there. Montana will break you before the first winter's through. Perhaps, Ethan conceded with a slight smile, but I'm willing to learn. That's partly why I'm here. I hoped we might establish good relations as neighbors. We ain't neighbors, Thomas said flatly. You're trespassing on what should have been mine. Jessica felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassed by her father's rudeness. Mr. Keller, please excuse my father. We've had a long day hunting. Perhaps you'd like to join us for supper. Thomas's head whipped toward her. Who gave you permission to invite strangers to my table? It's just common courtesy, Father, Jessica replied, standing her ground. I don't need a slip of a girl telling me about courtesy in my own home, he growled. Ethan cleared his throat. I should be going. I didn't mean to intrude. No, please, Jessica said, moving toward the stove. We have fresh venison. It'll only take a moment to prepare. Her father's hand closed around her wrist, pulling her back roughly. You'll do as you're told, girl. Jessica winced at the pressure. Father, you're hurting me. Mr. Dawson, Ethan said, his voice suddenly firmer. I think you should let go of your daughter. Thomas released Jessica only to turn his fury on their visitor. You don't tell me how to handle my family, boy. No, sir, I don't, Ethan agreed, but I can't stand by and watch a woman be mistreated. Mistreated? Thomas laughed bitterly. You call teaching respect mistreatment. This is why the world's going to hell. Too many soft-handed men who don't understand discipline. Jessica stepped back, rubbing her wrist. I'm going to start supper. You'll do no such thing, her father said. This man is leaving. Ethan reached for his hat. I apologize for the disturbance. Miss Dawson, it was a pleasure to meet you, brief though it was. Thomas moved to block Jessica from view. Get off my property, I'm going, Ethan said calmly, placing his hat on his head. He nodded to Jessica. Madam. Jessica watched him leave, feeling a strange sense of loss as the door closed behind him. She knew she would be the target of her father's anger once they were alone, and she braced herself for the storm. You disrespected me in front of a stranger, Thomas said, his voice dangerously low. I was only being hospitable, she replied. You were undermining me, he countered, his face reddening. Just like your mother used to do. The mention of her mother sent a jolt of anger through Jessica. Don't you dare speak of her that way. She loved you even when you made it difficult. His hand rose so quickly she barely saw it coming. Jessica flinched, preparing for the blow, but it never landed. Instead, she heard the door burst open and heavy footsteps cross the room. No more, came Ethan Keller's firm voice. Jessica opened her eyes to see the cowboy standing between her and her father, his hand gripping Thomas's upraised wrist, her father's face contorted with rage. You're dead, boy. Maybe so, Ethan replied evenly, but not before I make sure Miss Dawson is safe. Thomas struggled against Ethan's grip, but the younger man was stronger. This is none of your business. I'm making it my business, Ethan said. A man who raises his hand to a woman isn't much of a man at all. Jessica stood frozen, torn between fear for what her father might do and amazement at this stranger's intervention. No one had ever stood up to Thomas Dawson before, not since her mother died. Miss Dawson, Ethan said, not taking his eyes off her father, would you be so kind as to step outside for a moment? Jessica hesitated, worry for both men keeping her rooted in place. Please, Ethan added. She nodded and moved toward the door, casting one last glance at the tableau before stepping onto the porch. The cool evening air helped clear her head as she heard muffled voices from inside. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was tense. Several minutes passed before the door opened and Ethan emerged, his expression somber. "Your father and I have come to an understanding," he said quietly. "He's agreed that it might be best if you stayed elsewhere for a few days while he cools off." Jessica's eyes widened. "I can't leave. This is my home." "I know," Ethan said gently, "and I wouldn't suggest it if I thought you'd be safe here tonight." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain composed. "Mrs. Walsh has a daughter in town, doesn't she?" Ethan suggested. "Or perhaps the minister's wife could offer lodging." Jessica shook her head. "Everyone in town knows my father. They'd never cross him by taking me in." Ethan frowned, considering. "I have a cabin on my property. It's small, but it's clean. You'd be welcome to stay there while I take the main house." "I couldn't possibly." "Please, Miss Dawson," he interrupted. "I understand your concern for propriety, but I give you my word as a gentleman that your reputation will remain intact." Jessica glanced back at the house, imagining her father's fury simmering inside. She'd seen that look before, and it never boded well. Usually she could calm him down or hide until his anger passed, but tonight felt different, dangerous. "Very well," she said finally, "just for tonight." Ethan nodded. "I'll saddle your horse." As they rode toward the Wilson now Keller ranch in the gathering dusk, Jessica found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle, his posture relaxed but alert. "Why did you come back?" she asked finally. Ethan kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I never left. I was halfway to my horse when I heard the argument escalating. Thought I should stick around just in case." "That was foolish," she said. "My father has shot men for less." "Some things are worth the risk," he replied simply. The old Wilson ranch appeared on the horizon, bathed in the golden light of sunset. The main house was a solid structure, though clearly in need of repair. A smaller cabin sat about 100 yards away, nestled among a stand of pines. "That'll be your accommodation," Ethan said, nodding toward the cabin. "It was the foreman's quarters, I believe." Jessica dismounted when they reached the cabin, her legs stiff from the ride. Ethan tied their horses to the hitching post before moving to open the door. "I aired it out yesterday," he explained, lighting a lamp just inside. "It's nothing fancy, but it's sound." Jessica stepped inside, taking in the simple furnishings. A narrow bed stood against one wall, covered with a patchwork quilt. A table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and a small stove sat in the corner. "It's perfect," she said, surprised to find she meant it. The cabin had a peaceful feel that her father's house had lacked for years. Ethan nodded, clearly relieved. "There's food in the cupboard." "Not much, but enough for breakfast. I'll bring you something for supper from the main house." "Thank you," Jessica said, suddenly overwhelmed by the strange turn her day had taken. "For everything." Ethan shifted, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I've lived with my father's temper for years, and not once has anyone intervened." He studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Then they weren't men worth knowing." With that, he tipped his hat and left her alone in the cabin. True to his word, Ethan returned an hour later with a tray of food, simple fare, but hot and plentiful. They ate together at the small table, talking easily about everything except what had happened at her father's ranch. Jessica learned that Ethan had grown up in Nebraska, the son of a farmer who lost everything in a drought. He'd headed west at 17, working as a cowhand until he'd saved enough to buy his own land. "Why Montana?" she asked, curious about what had drawn him to this particular territory. "Saw it once when I was driving cattle to Fort Benton," he replied. "Never forgot how beautiful it was. Promised myself I'd come back someday. And here you are," she said with a small smile. "Here I am," he agreed, returning her smile with one that made her heart beat a little faster. When he left for the main house, promising to return in the morning, Jessica found herself standing in the doorway watching until his figure disappeared into the darkness. The next few days established a routine. Ethan would work on the ranch during the day, repairing fences and assessing the property, while Jessica kept to the cabin or helped with small tasks. In the evenings, they would share supper and conversation that grew increasingly comfortable. On the fourth day, Mrs. Walsh arrived with a message from her father. He wanted Jessica to return home. "He says he's sorry, miss," the older woman said, though her expression suggested she didn't believe it. "Says things will be different." Jessica exchanged a glance with Ethan, who had been nearby when Mrs. Walsh arrived. "You don't have to go back," he said quietly. "He's my father," Jessica replied, though the thought of returning filled her with dread. Mrs. Walsh cleared her throat. "If I may speak plainly, Miss Jessica, I've worked for your father for 15 years. I knew him when your mother was alive, and I've known him since. He doesn't change." Jessica nodded, grateful for the housekeeper's honesty. "What would you do, Mrs. Walsh?" the older woman sighed. "I'd find a way to make my own path, miss. You're a grown woman now, not a child to be ordered about." After Mrs. Walsh left, Jessica walked to the edge of the property, looking out over the rolling landscape. Ethan joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I can't go back," she said finally. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he offered. "No strings attached." Jessica turned to face him. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Ethan seemed surprised by the question. "Why wouldn't I be? Most men wouldn't involve themselves in a family matter. Most men wouldn't offer shelter to a woman they barely know." "I'm not most men," he said simply. Jessica studied his face, finding nothing but sincerity there. "No, you certainly are not." That night, Jessica made a decision. She would return to her father's house, but not to stay. She would collect her belongings and make plans for her future, a future that, for the first time, she could imagine without her father's shadow looming over it. Ethan insisted on accompanying her the next morning. "Just to make sure everything goes smoothly," he said, though both knew he was concerned about Thomas Dawson's reaction. The ranch was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet, Jessica thought as they approached the house. "Father," she called, pushing open the front door. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned and a bottle of whiskey broken on the floor. Jessica's heart raced as she moved toward her father's study, Ethan close behind. Thomas Dawson sat slumped at his desk, a half-empty bottle before him. He looked up as they entered, his bloodshot eyes narrowing at the sight of Ethan. "So," he slurred, "you've brought him back with you. Your mother would be so proud." Jessica stiffened. "I've come for my things, Father. I won't be staying." Thomas laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "Running away with the first man who showed you kindness. You're weaker than I thought." "Mr. Dawson," Ethan said evenly, "your daughter is one of the strongest women I've ever met. You should be proud of her." Thomas stood unsteadily, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Don't tell me what to feel about my own daughter, boy." Jessica moved toward the stairs. "I'll just get my things." Her father's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "You're not going anywhere." Ethan stepped forward immediately. "Let her go, Mr. Dawson." "Or what?" Thomas challenged, his grip tightening on Jessica's arm. "Father, please." Jessica said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You're hurting me." "You need to be taught respect," Thomas growled, raising his other hand. Her father raised his fist, but before it could descend, the cowboy stepped between them and said, "No more." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm, his posture tense but controlled. "This ends now, Mr. Dawson." Thomas's face contorted with rage. "Get out of my house." "Not without Jessica," Ethan replied steadily. For a moment, Jessica thought her father might attack Ethan, but something in the younger man's eyes made Thomas hesitate. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence, or maybe the unmistakable determination. Whatever it was, Thomas Dawson backed down. He released Jessica's arm and stumbled back to his chair, suddenly looking much older than his years. "Take her then," he muttered, reaching for the whiskey bottle. "She's just like her mother, too headstrong for her own good." Jessica felt a pang of sadness as she looked at her father, a shell of the man he once was. "I loved you, Father. I still do, but I can't live like this anymore." He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the amber liquid in his glass. Ethan placed a gentle hand on Jessica's back. "Let's get your things." Upstairs, Jessica packed quickly, taking only what she could carry: clothing, a few books, and the silver locket that had been her mother's. As she worked, Ethan stood by the window watching the yard below. "What will you do now?" he asked as she closed her small trunk. Jessica paused, considering. "I'm not sure. I have some money saved. Perhaps I'll go to Helena and look for work." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious. "Or you could stay." "At your ranch?" she asked, her heart beating faster. "Yes," he said. Then, as if realizing how his offer might sound, he quickly added, "As my housekeeper, officially. The cabin would be yours with fair wages." Jessica studied him, noting the slight flush on his tan cheeks. "Is that really what you're asking me, Mr. Keller?" Ethan met her gaze steadily. "No, Miss Dawson, it isn't, but it's all I have the right to ask at the moment." The honesty of his answer touched her deeply. "Then yes, I accept the position of housekeeper, for now." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "For now." They left without saying goodbye to her father. Jessica knew it was better that way. As they rode back to Ethan's ranch, she felt a curious mixture of sadness and liberation. Behind her lay everything she had ever known. Ahead, uncertainty but also possibility. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to Jessica's life. She kept the main house clean and prepared meals, while Ethan worked from dawn till dusk repairing fences, mending the barn roof, and preparing for his first cattle drive in the spring. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in breathtaking colors. Their conversations deepened as they shared stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Jessica learned that Ethan had lost both parents to influenza when he was 16, leaving him to fend for himself. He spoke of his wandering years with a hint of nostalgia, but admitted he'd always longed for a place to call his own. "Not just land," he explained one evening, "but a home. A real home." Jessica understood perfectly. Despite growing up in the same house her entire life, she had rarely felt at home there after her mother died. "What makes a house a home?" she mused, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Ethan considered her question thoughtfully. "Love, I suppose, and not just romantic love, though that's part of it. The kind of love that makes you feel safe, accepted." His words resonated with her deeply. "I haven't felt that in a very long time." "Neither have I," he admitted, his gaze meeting hers in the twilight. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Ethan cleared his throat and stood. "It's getting late. You should get some rest." Jessica nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good night, Mr. Keller." He smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting in a way that made her heart skip. I think after all this time you might call me Ethan." "Good night, Ethan," she amended, loving the way his name felt on her lips. "Good night, Jessica," he replied softly before turning toward the main house. As winter settled over the Montana territory, the ranch became increasingly isolated. Heavy snow made trips to town infrequent, leaving Jessica and Ethan alone for days at a time. Despite the propriety of their arrangement, her in the cabin, him in the main house, Jessica found herself more aware of Ethan with each passing day. The way his hands, strong and calloused, handled tools with surprising gentleness. The sound of his laughter, rare but warming. The thoughtful expression he wore when listening to her speak, as if her words truly mattered. On Christmas Eve, Ethan invited her to dine at the main house. He had shot a wild turkey earlier in the week, and together they prepared a feast that would have rivaled any in town. The house was warm and festive, with pine boughs decorating the mantel and candles casting a golden glow over the table. Jessica had worn her best dress, a deep green wool that her mother had helped her make before she died. "You look beautiful," Ethan said when she arrived, his voice carrying a note of awe that made her blush. "Thank you," she replied, handing him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas." Ethan accepted the gift with surprise. "You didn't have to get me anything." "I wanted to," she said simply. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in a rich blue that matched his eyes. Jessica had worked on it secretly for weeks, using wool she'd purchased on her last trip to town. "It's perfect," he said, running his fingers over the soft yarn. "But now I feel foolish." "I don't have anything for you." Jessica shook her head. "You've given me more than you know." Their dinner was the most pleasant Jessica had experienced in years. They talked and laughed, sharing stories of Christmases past and their hopes for the future. When the meal was finished, Ethan surprised her by pulling out a fiddle. "You play?" she asked, delighted. He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "Not well, but enough to recognize a tune." He began to play a familiar Christmas carol, the sweet notes filling the room. Jessica found herself humming along, then singing softly. Ethan's playing grew more confident as she sang, their music blending in perfect harmony. When the song ended, Ethan looked at her with such tenderness that Jessica felt her breath catch. "I do have something for you," he said, setting down the fiddle. "Though it's not a conventional gift." He crossed to his desk and returned with a document which he handed to Jessica. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding the paper. "Deed to the North Pasture," Ethan explained. 10 acres, including the creek. I'm signing it over to you." Jessica stared at him in shock. "Ethan, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's yours," he insisted. "Regardless of what happens between us, I want you to have something that's truly yours, land that no one can take from you." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes as she realized what this meant. Independence, security, things she'd never thought possible as a woman alone in the territory. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. Ethan took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Because I've fallen in love with you, Jessica Dawson. And love shouldn't come with chains. If you choose to stay with me, I want it to be because you want to, not because you have nowhere else to go." Jessica's heart soared at his words. "And if I choose to stay?" "Then I would be the happiest man in Montana territory," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Jessica placed the deed on the table and moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "I choose to stay, Ethan Keller, not for the land but for you." When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, as if he feared she might change her mind. But Jessica responded with all the feelings she'd kept contained for months, and the kiss deepened into something that promised a lifetime of passion. They were married in the spring, when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows and new calves dotted the pastures. The ceremony was small, held on their ranch with only a few friends from town in attendance. To Jessica's surprise, Mrs. Walsh arrived with a message from her father. "He says he's sorry," the housekeeper told her. "Says he hopes you'll be happier than he was able to make you." Jessica felt a weight lift from her heart. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning. "Tell him thank you and that he's welcome to visit when he's ready." As she walked toward Ethan, who waited for her beneath an arch of spring flowers, Jessica felt truly at peace. The man who had once stepped between her and her father's rage now stood ready to share his life with her, not as her protector, but as her partner. "You look like a dream," Ethan whispered as she reached him. Jessica smiled, taking his hands in hers. "Not a dream, a future." "Our future," he amended, his eyes filled with a promise that would last a lifetime. Years later, when their children asked how their parents met, Ethan and Jessica would exchange a look of understanding before telling a carefully edited version of the tale. But in private moments, they would remember that pivotal day when her father raised a fist. The cowboy stepped between them and said, "No more," the day that changed everything and led them to the life they had built together, full of love, respect, and the kind of home they had both always longed for.